Hi everybody. So we're back, and this particular video is 13B on the Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. So it's the second video for class 13. And if you're Tuesday, Thursday folks, this is the first video for class 10. So this is 10A. So up to this point, we've been talking about the accounting cycle, and in chapters 1 and 2, we learned how to analyze and journalize transactions. We've learned that after we journalize a transaction at some point towards the end of the month, we post those transactions to the ledger so that we can turn those chronologically listed transactions into account balances. So we take those account balances and we put them on an unadjusted trial balance, and then we sit down and we think about, well, what wasn't really included in those transactions, but that is really actually a revenue or an expense for my company, and that affects an asset or a liability. So we think about those and we do adjusting entries, which we analyze, journalize, and post to the ledger. Then after we've done our adjusting entries, we do an adjusted trial balance, right? And then we use that adjusted trial balance to prepare the financial statements in our specific order: income statement, statement of retained earnings, and finally the balance sheet. Well, I would imagine that if you're about to prepare financial statements, it'd be nice to make sure they've all worked out and balanced and everything's going to work out okay. So what we do as accountants is we use worksheets. So that's Excel. All right, so we go to Excel and we put our worksheet in there. And we've already talked a little bit about this in lab, right? Our big Excel project for the semester is a worksheet that we're going to complete. And we talked a little bit about it at the end of chapter 3, because we talked about doing the adjusted trial balance in a worksheet. And now we're going to talk about filling out the rest of those columns, the income statement and the balance sheet columns. And that's how we determine net income. We make everything balance, and it's all good. So let's talk about that. Alright, so how could a worksheet help in preparing financial statements? Well, as you know, the income statement section includes only revenue and expense accounts. The revenue and expenses from the adjusted trial balance section will be transferred to the appropriate column in the income statement section. So that's using that worksheet. Alright, the balance sheet statement section includes the asset and liability accounts and all equity accounts, but not revenues and expenses. The balance of each of these accounts will be transferred from the adjusted trial balance section of the worksheet to the appropriate column in the balance sheet section. Then you compute net income or net loss as total revenues minus total expense. Enter the net income or loss as the balancing amount in the income statement and balance sheet sections. If net income exists, the balance will be entered in the debit column of the income statement section and the credit column of the balance sheet column. If net loss exists, the balance will be entered in the credit column of the income statement section and the debit column of the balance sheet section. So let's look at a worksheet that we've just been talking about. So, okay, so this is a worksheet, right? And this particular worksheet is on page 190, Exhibit 4-4, and pretty much this is what you're going to do for your Excel project that you turn in for 40 points in November. So this will be an excellent example for you for the worksheet assignment. So here's the deal. So, you know, we did all our transactions all month long, and we analyzed and journalized, and we posted them to the ledger, and we put those ledger balance in the unadjusted trial balance column. So if it was a debit account like an asset or an expense, we put them in the debit column. If it's a credit like a liability or a revenue, we put them in the credit column. And we came down and we totaled them, and we said, oh yeah, our debits equal our credits. Then we sat and we thought about what adjustments needed to be made. So we made the adjusting entries, and we've put them in this worksheet right here. All right, so now we know, okay, we've done some adjusting entries, we got some revenues, some expenses, we need to, take some depreciation. So we've put those in their proper debit and credit columns. Then we moved the new balance over to the adjusted trial balance column. So cash is never going to have an adjusting entry, so you just move that over to the assets part of the adjustment, and so everything gets moved over. If it has an adjustment, you need to either add or subtract and get your new balance and put it in the proper column. So once you've got your adjusted trial balance all filled out and you know that you balance, now you start working on your financial statements to make sure that before you write them all up and make that report for people, you have to make sure that looks good and looks right. So you fill out your income statement columns and your balance sheet columns. So all this is about is moving the proper account balances to the proper column. So the first column, right, because it's the first statement we prepare, is the income statement column. So we move our revenues, whatever's in the adjusted trial balance column for revenue, we move it over to the credit side of the income statement columns. Then all the expenses get moved to the debit columns, and we sum them, right? Well, they're not going to balance, right, because hopefully we had net income, so our revenue is a little higher than our expenses. So your expenses will be slightly less. So the difference between them, right, the difference between revenues and expenses we already know is our net income. So you subtract that, and then you add that to the little net income place, right, the little net income row for net income. And now your debits, you take your expenses plus your net income, that should equal your credits or the revenue. So the difference between debits and credits, that's your net income, right? So then the same thing when you think about it, because that's what's changing your retained earnings, right? You think about the retained, it's not a retained earnings statement column here, but when you think about it, what's changing retained earnings are the dividends and the net income, right? So dividends is already on here, and so when we do this, right, we're going to move we calculate the balance sheet. Now we're going to move all the rest of the accounts over, right? Even though dividends don't actually go on the balance sheet, they go on the statement of retained earnings, we're going to put dividends in the balance sheet column because they are affecting retained earnings. So we move all your assets, all your liabilities, all your equities, plus dividends, because dividends really essentially an equity account. You move them over to the balance sheet column. So the difference between them, right, is going to be net income. So when you move all your assets over and all your liabilities and all your equities over, and you sum up your balance sheet column, they're not going to balance. But if you plug that net income on the credit side, now they should balance, because what net income is doing is net income is increasing retained earnings, which increases equity, or net loss is decreasing. So if you had a net loss, you would put them in opposite columns, right? So if you had a net loss, the net income would go in the credit column of the income statement and the debit column of the balance sheet. But that's all you do to fill it out, is really, once you've got your adjusting entries done and your adjusted trial balance calculated, it's just a matter of moving them over and totaling them, and the difference should be the same amount, and that's your net income, or the change that you need to make to retain earnings. All right, so that's it. That is a worksheet. So remember this. You probably won't get started on that for a little while because it's not due till November, but right here, page 190, this is your example for the Excel spreadsheet. All right, so for my folks in the Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, that was your last part of 13, all right? And so for folks in my Tuesday, Thursday class, you have another video for class 10. But for Monday, Wednesday, Friday, class 13 folks, you're ready to move on to class 14. All right, see you in the next video. Bye.